like to call to order our May 15th Left 2 board meeting, and I think we just had somebody beep in on the phone. Who's there?
Yes, this is Senator Warner.
All right. Thank you, Senator, for calling in.
Uh-huh.
All right, I believe with Senator Warnick, we do have a quorum. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All righty. Before we start with our agenda, I'd ask for a moment of silence for those who have passed since our last meeting. All right, thank you very much. So our first order of business for our meeting today is the approval of minutes from December 2018 through April 2019. The December meeting was a regular meeting. The January through April meetings were the legislative updates.
And admin updates.
Admin
yes.
updates. And so those are before you for consideration. Motion's been made and seconded to adopt the minutes as presented. Is there any discussion? Seeing none or hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. All right, thank you very much. Item number 2, the 2019 legislative session recap, and I'll turn that over to Jacob. Thank you, Jacob.
There we go. For the record, Jacob White, staff to the board. I'm going to start with the 2019 operating budget. There were 2 areas in the budget impacting the Left 2 board. First, the legislature funded the contribution rates adopted by the Left 2 board, which, as a reminder, were for the member 8.59%, for the employer 5.15%, and for the state 3.44%. And so for the state, that totaled for 2020 $73 million, and for 2021 $75.8. And then also in the budget, the legislature appropriated $50,000 from the general fund to the Left 2 board to study allowing tribal police into the Left 2 plan. That was to study the tax, legal, fiscal, policy, and administrative issues related to allowing tribal law enforcement officers to become members of the plan, and the report to the legislature will be due by January 1st, 2020. Next, bills affecting Left Plan 2, which passed the legislature. First, we had Senate Bill 5355, the Left PERS Eligibility Gap Bill, and this was a bill that the Left 2 board endorsed. As a reminder, this was one that was brought to the board's attention, an individual who had worked a career as a police officer but had, through a series of gaps, first in Left 1, then PERS 1, then Left 2, had allowed him to work a full career without receiving a pension. And so this bill closed that gap, and we're still only aware of the one individual who this bill impacts. And so he will receive a pension, and that pension will be prospective only. That was one issue that came up during the legislative session, whether it applied retroactively or not. And if it applied retroactively, he would have got a very large lump sum payment, so it was prospective only. And the member would have to pay back all of the contributions he owed without interest, and he would do so by taking an actual reduction in his benefit. And so I did get an update this morning from Department of Retirement Systems, and that individual that we're aware of has applied for retirement and should receive his first pension check at the end of the month. There was some cost to that bill, however, not enough cost to impact contribution rates. And the cost was due to Left Plan 2 subsidizing the member interest. The member did not have to pay the interest payments. And also there was a difference. The member's employer had paid his PERS contribution rate, but not the Left 2 contribution rate. And so the difference in those was also subsidized by the plan. House Bill 1408, spousal consent. This was a Left 2 board endorsed bill, as well as a Select Committee on Pension Policy bill, and it was brought to the board and Select Committee by DRS. It required, previously when a member was retiring, they had to get spousal consent even if they were leaving their spouse more than the default 50%. And so what that did is it resulted in extra administrative work and made it more difficult for people to apply completely online. They had to get the spousal consent signed and mail that into DRS. And so this should make it more efficient for people to apply online. And so that one also had no cost to Left Plan 2, and it's effective July 28th, 2019. Also, there was House Bill 1909, Confidentiality of Industrial Insurance Claim Records, and this was not a Left Plan 2 board endorsed bill. However, it did result from a bill passed last session that made PTSD law enforcement officers and firefighters able to get workers' comp for PTSD. And after that bill was passed, members brought it to the board's attention and eventually the legislature's attention that there were some concerns about the nature of the confidentiality of the medical treatment they were seeking. And then when they applied for PTSD, not like applying for a back injury or something like that, people seeking PTSD counseling divulge all kinds of personal information to their counselor, and that was something that to receive effective treatment they need to do, and there were concerns about that treatment, what they divulged to their counselor, then being shared with their employer, and people at that employer gossiping about that and sharing it with individuals that did not have a work purpose for knowing that information. And so what this bill did is it creates a $1,000 fine for an employer sharing that information with anyone that is not supposed to be receiving it. And that $1,000 fine goes back to the workers' comp pension fund. And And so also there was House Bill 1913, presumptive illness. This was another bill that was not Left to board endorsed. It makes the occupational disease presumptions for firefighters apply to certain EMTs and fire investigators, and it adds additional cancers to the cancer occupational disease presumption, including mesothelioma, stomach cancer, non-melanoma skin cancer, breast cancer in women, and cervical cancer. This bill also created an occupational disease presumption for heart problems and infectious diseases for law enforcement officers. And it created a new process for identifying additional diseases for presumptive care or presumptive coverage. It requires the director of L&I to create an advisory committee on occupational disease presumptions, and it'll be made up of scientists who are specified in the bill. And so the process becomes, instead of having to bring these ad hoc to the legislature, and it creates this committee, and the legislative committees will refer a potential occupational disease, presumptive occupational disease, to this board. They will review it, make a recommendation back to the legislature, and then the legislature would still then need to pass legislation to make it a presumptive coverage. And there was a cost to this bill to Left Plan 2. It was a 5 basis point for employee cost, 3 for employer, 2 for state, which the total impact of that, the total employer impact was $2 million for the next biennium, 2.1 for the following, and 39.6 for the 25-year outlook. And this bill was also effective July 28th of this year. And then the final bill, House Bill 2144, the Benefit Improvement Account. Once again, this was a bill that was not Left to board endorsed. It makes a one-time transfer of $300 million from the Left to Retirement Fund to the Left to Benefit Improvement Account, and it repeals any further state obligation to fund the Left to Benefit Improvement Account, and it also eliminates transfers from the general fund to the local public safety enhancement account. There was no contribution rate impact because the normal cost of the plan does not change. However, it does impact the plan's funded ratio, dropping it from 109% to 106%, and this bill was effective immediately. So there were also some bills affecting Left Plan 2 that did not pass the legislature this year. One of those was a Left to board endorsed bill, and that was House Bill 1414 and its companion, Senate Bill 5335. And this was the month of death payment. And this was a bill that was also brought to us by DRS and also endorsed by the Select Committee on Pension Policy. our understanding of why, so as a reminder, this was the bill that would pay on your final month would pay the full month instead of prorating it, which is the current practice. And our understanding of why this bill did not pass this year was the cost of it. And so just a quick rundown of the cost of the bill. For this biennium, it would have been the cost would have been $4.9 million to the state, $10.4 million to the employer, and 4.8. I got that wrong. 10.4 to the employee, 4.8 to the employer. And then House Bill 2127 concerning additional contribution rates. This bill was known as the Dolan Bill. And so just a quick reminder about the Dolan case. This was a case involving PERS, King County, and contracted public defenders who worked for King County. It's a case that's been going on for many years and was recently completed. And it resulted in PERS members and PERS employers subsidizing King County. So it was this bill sought to prevent that from happening in the future. It did not make it out of the House of Origin this year. So there were also some other pension bills not impacting Left 2 that passed. So I'll go over those real quickly. These were bills out of the Select Committee on Pension Policy. One was the purchase of additional annuity for PERS, CSRS, and PSERS. And so that was one that Left Plan 2 already had and now is, I think, made it to all the other plans. And this one allows members of all DRS-administered retirement systems to purchase a lifetime annuity benefit through the investment board. And then also Senate Bill 5360, this was a Plan 2 default for PERS, TERS, and CSRS. So the plan default had been Plan 3, and there was a push for that to be changed to Plan 2 because the thought behind that was that the people who default are probably not the people who are going to pay real close attention to their pension account, and so Plan 2 would be a better fit for those individuals than Plan 3, which requires people to be a bit more active. So that was the legislative update. If there's any questions I can answer. No?
Any questions from the board? Comments? Okay.
Jacob, on that one bill, the duty day, or the month death benefit, to $20 million, and that's because it didn't just affect police and fire; it was over the whole range of pensions.
Yes, that's correct.
And that's one of those issues that once you get into it, sometimes the benefit will hurt us more than it would help us. So I understand what the legislature did. Once I think people understand that, they'll understand why it can be passed at the time. So
Yes,
I thank the legislature on their work, and hopefully we'll get it next time if we can do some better numbers on that. If not, we'll just keep on working on it. So thank you.
Any other questions? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. Item number 3 on the agenda is the 2019 interim planning, and Ryan Frost.
While Ryan's getting up here and getting ready to go, we're going to break this up into 3 pieces: benefit topics, actuarial topics, and administrative topics. We left a lot of time on the agenda for discussion about some of these things. As you'll see here in a moment, it's going to be an unusually busy interim. So the other thing I wanted to mention is, Mr. Chair, members, if you want to take a break at any time between some of those different sections, those are the 3 breakdowns. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Frost.
Thanks, Steve. Mr. Chair, members of the board, for the record, Ryan Frost, board staff, and this is your 2019 interim planning. As Steve mentioned, I'm going to break this up into 3 separate sections. First up will be the benefit topics, second will be the actuarial topics, and lastly will be the administrative topics that Steve will actually cover. So here's the list of 10 I'll break down each of these individually, but just to go over them as a whole. Number 1 is interruptive military service. 2 is the survivor option election. 3, the benefit improvement account. 4th, tribal participation in LEF. 5th, the annuity minimum. 6th, the month of death. 7, career change. 8, disabled members return to work. 9, PEB coverage for catastrophic retirees. And lastly, standby pay as basic salary. So first up is interruptive military service. The board passed legislation in 2018 which added new campaigns that would qualify for free interruptive military service credit under the definition of veteran. However, the Department of Defense has recently established a comprehensive campaign, expeditionary, and service medal policy in recognition of the fact that the prior naming conventions they used for certain medals was inconsistent. And since the Left 2 military service credit statute followed the federal conventions, our statute no longer matches that federal language. Board staff has also since learned that some campaigns which previously did not qualify for free service credit have retroactively awarded medals which would now qualify. And additionally, Department of Defense has recognized that service in an operation could qualify for either a campaign medal or some other medal, depending on the degree of personal risk involved in the service. So no longer is it just the campaign that matters, now it's also the level of service. So for example, service in Operation New Dawn, which is also not in our statute, can qualify for either an expeditionary medal or an Iraq campaign medal. And because of this change, the Department of Defense is encouraging veterans of past campaigns to actually apply for an upgrade to a campaign medal if they believe that their service would qualify. And then one other issue that has come up the last few sessions is allowing members who are granted expeditionary medals to receive free service credit. I was approached this session by committee staff, caucus staff, and a member of the legislature with questions about costs for this and policy questions, and ultimately some bill language. So the board may want to look at the potential costs to be able to better inform stakeholders and legislators, as well as the board's previous policy of not allowing these types of medals to qualify for free interruptive service credit. Are there any questions on this before I move to the next topic?
Can you just maybe elaborate a little bit on, it says potential cost to better, or to be able to better inform stakeholders. Are we talking about geographic, having meetings in different locations, or something
more
different?
just have it be able to, if the there's not a lot of data on members who receive expeditionary medals. We know that they're more common than campaign medals. So the goal here would be able to have at least an estimate of a number of what it would cost to open this up, the free service credit for expeditionary medals, because currently only campaign medals qualify for free service credit. So members with expeditionary medals sometimes are confused on why they're not allowed free service credit as well. And legislators are also sometimes have that question. So the potential cost would just be being able to put a number on what it would cost to add members with an expeditionary medal into that free service credit category.
Would this be something we'd want to consider, just maybe a separate, maybe a little article or something for our quarterly newsletter?
Yeah.
I mean, I know it gets mailed to everybody.
Right.
I know we can't force them to read it, but
At the very least, we're going to have to change the statute because the state statute no longer matches the federal statute. When we go in to change the statute, the last time we did it in 2018, we had some ideas about the next time we change this, even if for a technical correction, we could improve it a little bit. The current definition, for instance, is in a general section, and it's referenced by a lot of other benefits besides pensions. So one possibility now would be creating a new definition just for pensions. It would apply to all the plans, so it's something that's going to have to be coordinated with the Select Committee on Pension Policy. And then Ryan's right, this issue of why do expeditionary medals and the difference in service, usually campaign medals, you're in the combat zone and you're in combat. The expeditionary medals you might get for being assigned to the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. You're supporting the campaign, but you're not actually in combat. But you're still away from your family, and so a number of legislators, plan members, have for years pushed for more information about why the distinction and what would be the cost of expanding it to include that additional level of service. So as we're working on this issue, this interim, the idea is we'll give you and legislators and staff everything that you might need for that issue in case it comes up again next session. Or to the extent that the board feels comfortable making a recommendation on that, you'll be able to do that as well.
And another benefit is that the board's aware that there's already 2 new campaigns that aren't included in that definition. So to keep the board from having to amend that definition every year or two when a new campaign pops up, a more general definition would probably be the way to go. Okay, I'll move on to the next issue, which is the survivor option election. This issue came up during the interim last year. The issue here is that a member's election of a survivor benefit on their pension is irrevocable. Some plan members have come to the board with concerns that their monthly pension amount was not what they were expecting, and with this new information, they would like to adjust their survivor option. Previous staff reports have looked at adding qualifying event windows for members to change their survivor option, and those reports have the conclusions coming out that as long as the window's short enough, anti-selection bias shouldn't be an issue.
You're right. And when we're talking about the window, I think what we were talking was between 30 and 60 days.
There was a few different windows, I think, presented last year. That was definitely one of them. One was a little bit longer, maybe, I think, up to 6 months. There's another that said, I think, within 3 pension payments.
Is this the time? I would say not 6 months. Within 2 or 3 paychecks, they know whether they're receiving what they thought they were going to get or not. And then letting it go 6 months, I think, is way too long and would create too much of a problem. So, and I think this, if we're able to get this bill moving next year, I think we want to keep the options as succinct as possible, because if we give too many options, like anything else, once you confuse people, they'll say no. So thanks.
Understood.
Steve?
Quick question. Can you remind me if you remember what the Oregon policy is?
I don't remember.
I think it was either 60 or 90 days. 90 days?
Jacob Bright might remember. It was his issue last year.
60. Okay, thanks.
And again, this is another issue that would apply to all the plans, so we'll want to coordinate with DRS and the Select Committee on Pension Policy.
Okay, I'll move on to the third issue, which is the benefit improvement account. As Jacob mentioned in his ledge update, this was House Bill 2144, and it made a one-time transfer of $300 million from the Left 2 Retirement Fund to the Left 2 Benefit Improvement Account, and also repealed any further state obligation to fund the Left 2 Benefit Improvement Account. So where do we go from here? The plan is to have a benefit improvement account check-in at every board meeting this interim, and then to kind of break it up into 3 parts. First being a project plan, what are the board's goals? Second part would be pricing, what can you afford? And third would be coming to a consensus because any benefit improvement has to be approved by the legislature. Any questions on this?
Again, in one form or another, we'll probably have the BIA on the agenda every meeting this interim to kind of help answer questions, assess what happened and where are we, and then with the how do you move forward from here on what to do with the money in the account.
The previous 2 topics both had reaches into SCPP, DRS, and as well as us. the three groups, correct?
Yes.
This one, is this strictly a left two?
Yes.
I'll try and make note of ones that cross over as we go into this a little further. Next up is tribal participation in LEF. Again, as Jacob mentioned in his ledge update, the 2019 legislature appropriated $50,000 to the LEF 2 board to study the tax, legal, fiscal, policy, and admin issues related to allowing tribal law enforcement to become members of LEF Plan 2. This became possible due to the Pension Protection Act of 2006, which revised the definition of governmental plan to include certain functions of tribes. The key issues that'll be hit on during this study are the sovereign immunity issue, Social Security issues, the member's dual status as a governmental and non-governmental employee, and the last issue is that will be that very few states allow tribal government employees into the state's retirement system, but thankfully Washington does have some experience due to allowing teachers into TERS a few years ago.
Do they have the tribal police? I don't know this, just a dumb question, but do they take their offenders to a tribal jail, or do they go to a regular?
It varies.
Yeah.
And so that'll be one of the things that we talk about is how do you manage the differences between one tribe and another? Yeah.
And their funding sources.
There'll be a host of different questions that are going to come up associated with that issue. And then there's no expectation that the board make any kind of recommendation, but the report will be completed before the next session.
Would it be for all tribal police officers, or
Yeah.
size? I mean,
Ones that would qualify, I believe, would be if that's where the board wanted to go. But it would be looking at the issues surrounding what it would take to allow these members into LEF.
Yeah, I think it was the Puyallups that were sort of driving the issue during session, but the study of the issues will be broad enough to apply to cover all the tribes.
questions? Steve?
Maybe, I don't know if it's part of this, or just could we get some background a little more on how the teacher system was set up, and then what other states, it says very few states, but how those states are doing it that do allow?
Yeah, that'll be part of the background on the initial report. Tentatively. July. We'll have all that for you.
Pat?
And not to pile on, but we'll probably see the justification on why the teachers were allowed in, because that'll probably drive how we deal with police.
Absolutely.
I think.
Yeah, it definitely will.
Absolutely.
The teacher participation issue was problematic.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that the legislature recognized was before they do anything, they want some thorough study of this issue, and that's where the board came in.
Thank you.
What's the issue of Social Security? Is it they don't, or they do?
They don't.
They don't. Okay. Yeah, I know a lot of us don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Questions? Anything else?
Okay, moving on. The next issue is the annuity minimum. So this issue is fairly new. The current annuity purchase minimum for LEF 2 members is $25,000. As Jacob mentioned in his ledge update, Senate Bill 5350 passed endorsed by the Select Committee on Pension Policy, which allowed the purchase of an actuarially equivalent life annuity benefit for PERS, PSERS, and SERS members, but their minimum purchase amount was $5,000. So the board may wish to look into lowering the LEF 2 annuity minimum purchase from 25 to 5. I think it's worth mentioning that the board is not aware of any members having concerns about that number being too high. Most annuity purchases made so far far exceed that $25,000 threshold, but I just wanted to make the board aware of that issue.
Questions? Okay. Right.
next issue is month of death, carried over from last interim. This issue focuses on allowing state retirement benefits to be paid until the end of the month in which the retiree or beneficiary dies. Current policy is that if DRS is not notified of the member's death before the cutoff time for processing the payment, the estate will receive a payment for the full month, but in these cases, DRS will send an invoice to the estate for repayment of any benefits paid beyond the date of death. So, for example, if a retiree or survivor dies on day 25 of a 30-day month, DRS will seek repayment of those remaining 5 days. And Jacob touched on some of the issues surrounding the bill in the legislature, mostly centered on cost being the prohibitive factor in this bill not moving forward.
All righty.
Okay.
Question, sorry.
Thanks, Ryan. Do we look into kind of how that breaks down? Let's say if we started to exempt the last 5 days of a month, or I don't know how that plays out.
That was not the proposal that DRS brought, but it's certainly something the board could look at and ask to be priced.
This one applies to all the plans too,
Right.
so we'll have to coordinate with the select committee. And one of the other issues Jacob mentioned in his ledge update, for the PERS and the TERS groups this session, I think that Plan 3 to default to Plan 2 was probably their priority. And so the month of death issue wasn't one of their top priorities. To the extent that it moves forward again, if it does, we'll want to find out, is anybody going to work it? Because the issue was brought to the select committee and the board by DRS, but they didn't work it. And to the extent that some of the other affected stakeholders, if it is or is not a priority for them, that'll be something that we'll want to assess for next session.
Okay. Next issue is career change. Multiple issues have surfaced in the past related to employers' interest in hiring left retirees into left positions. A bit of background on this issue is that prior to the 2005 career change bill endorsed by the Left 2 board, returning to work in any DRS-covered position triggered a stoppage of the member's Left 2 pension. Members now have the option of entering into a non-left position while still receiving their pension payments. The board previously learned that some Left 2 retirees were using that career change law to work as law enforcement officers or firefighters while drawing their pensions. And so in 2014, the board proposed curtailing the retiree's ability to draw a Left 2 pension and work in a historically left position. The legislative debate revealed tension between the board's original career change policy goal and the goal of allowing smaller jurisdictions to compete for law enforcement officers and firefighters that they can otherwise not afford. And that 2014 bill really just tried to put some parameters on if you're hiring a member to work in a position that was historically a Left 2 position, then that would be classified as a Left 2 position moving forward. Any questions?
Okay.
Next issue is disabled members return to work. The board has been briefed on this the last few interims. And this issue is the disability payments for members who recover from their disabilities are ambiguous if their previous employer refuses to hire them back. The current disability statute for Left Plan 2 states that when a member is determined to have recovered from a disability and therefore no longer entitled to workers' compensation benefits, that member's previous employer is required to hire them back at their previous rank and or pay. And then once back in service, a member begins earning service credit again and becomes eligible for an active member benefit when they retire. However, issues have arisen when the employer disagrees with the DRS's decision that the member has fully recovered from that disability. This leaves the member in an ambiguous circumstance pending that appeals decision because their disability payments have been stopped, but they're also not earning salary because their previous employer has refused to hire them back. DRS's current policy has been to just continue the disability payments pending the appeals decision. That's been an administrative decision they've made. That's not a decision that is in whack or anything requiring them to do so. so that policy could stop at any time.
How long has that been in effect?
The policy of them.
Yeah.
The first time we heard it was 2015, I believe. But I'm sure it's been going on much longer than that.
Okay.
The next issue is PEB coverage for catastrophic retirees. Left Point 2 catastrophic disability retirees and their survivors have different medical insurance access than survivors of members killed in the line of duty, even though both survivors and catastrophic disability retirees are reimbursed for their health care coverage premiums. Surviving spouses are eligible to purchase health care benefits from PEB. However, catastrophic retirees are only able to obtain health care coverage through COBRA while it's available, through retiree health care offered through their previous employer, which is not very common, or through the private market, and these are all more expensive options than coverage through PEB. And on top of that, the reimbursement amount for those premiums are capped at their former employer's current COBRA amount, and this has resulted in some catastrophic retirees still paying a portion of their premiums out of pocket, which was not the original goal of the board's catastrophic disability bill. Any questions on this one?
Okay.
Okay. Next is standby pay as basic salary. Standby pay is not part of basic salary or reportable compensation used in computing Left Point 2 contributions and pensions. Majority of firefighters and law enforcement officers do not receive standby pay. Instead, they're generally subject to call up if an emergency requires more resources than available from on-duty staff. However, there are some Left Point 2 members who do receive standby pay while off duty in exchange for being prepared to report to work on short notice. This payment is not considered compensation for services rendered and is not reportable compensation for Left Point 2. However, there are 2 state retirement systems where standby pay is reportable compensation, and that is in PERS and PSERS. Any questions on this one?
You know if they, the ones for that it is, I guess, reportable compensation, are they getting paid like a stipend, or is it an hour? How do they know anything about how they actually calculate what they're getting paid? And how
In PERS and PSERS, I don't know how it's calculated. I would assume it's probably at a certain percentage of their pay while they're on duty, and then or while they're off duty, and then if they get called on, then they would earn their full.
Because once they report back, they're most likely on an overtime
Right.
status. Yeah.
Right.
Pat, did you have a question?
PSERS is a lot newer than Left, but PERS is about the same age as Left. How did PERS get it and Left, or the other systems were left out? Or do we? Is there any history on this? Because I understand PSERS, but I don't understand the PERS side of it. And
That would be something the initial report would look into, I'm sure.
Okay.
Off the top of my head, I'm not sure why it was included in PERS and not Left.
it might have just been left out of Left.
That's
kind of a okay.
It wasn't just Left that was left out. It was TERS and
Yeah.
the other plans too. So
Okay.
could have been one that snuck through.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Any questions? All right.
So we're at the point where I think Steve mentioned if the board wanted to take a break, or we can just move forward to the next set of topics.
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
We back up to the month of death benefit.
Yeah.
I was just trying to think through this real, quickly, but the month of death benefit has kind of almost 2 deaths and a loss when there's a survivor benefit.
Right.
Was that treated equally, or are we treating them differently? If there's no survivor, then it's, how does that change things? Would that make an impact on the fiscal note by chance?
The way it was set up, it would apply to both. So if you didn't have a survivor, it would apply the month that the member died. And if you did have a survivor, it would apply the month that the survivor died.
Only.
Yeah.
Only one time, though?
Yeah.
Okay.
We have for discussion, maybe I went right over the top of it, but a member who was you know, maybe at an event, they had the California or the Reno shootings, or it was Las Vegas, actually, sorry. Is that on a benefit topic?
It can definitely be added.
Oh,
I
I'm
know
just-
it's been talked about in the last few interims. I believe there was no motion made to move it forward to table it.
Okay, just
So
making
it can
sure.
always be brought forward if the board wishes it for it
No,
to.
it's good. I just want to make sure we weren't missing something,
Okay.
so. All right. Go ahead and move on. Unless you need a break, Steve. Okay, just checking.
Okay, here are your list of 8 actuarial topics for the interim. First, supplemental rate adoption. This came out of the presumption bill. As Jacob mentioned, the estimated impact to the plan would be 5 basis points for the member, 3 basis points for the employer, and 2 basis points for the state. So that would be 2 presentations that the board will get on the history of supplemental rate adoptions, as well as what the impact will be to the plan.
Well, the board's policy is also to have all of those fiscal notes audited, and that's underway, and you'll have a presentation about the results of the audit.
I'll jump down to number 8 and do the other half of that. The benefit improvement account bill is also will also be audited as well. Second issue is the funding method corridor. The goal here was to put into statute the board's practice of funding the plan based on the entry age normal cost. The current funding method in statute is aggregate, and the funding corridor would be to seek to place some boundaries around the funded status where the board could consider to kind of leave things alone, and if it falls outside of that corridor, to make some changes.
This is a topic that the board has been working on for a couple of years, and it definitely came up in the legislative discussions around the benefit improvement account, trying to answer that question of how much reserve is reasonable. And so the goal will be to work with the actuary's office, bring this to you in a series of presentations throughout the interim, and have everything adopted before the start of the next legislative session.
Now we'll go over the proposed calendar in the next slide for all these topics to kind of give you a breakdown of what to expect each meeting. Third are new risk measures, also known as the Actuarial Standard of Practice 51. And what this does is it requires the actuary to identify risks that may reasonably be anticipated to significantly affect the pension plan's future financial condition. And these include investment risk, asset liability mismatch risk, interest rate risk, longevity, and other demographic risks and contribution risks. For public plans like LEF 2, the investment risk will generally be the most significant of these to look at. Next up is economic experience study. The board is presented with this every 2 years, and it looks at if the plan's inflation, salary growth, rate of return, and system growth assumptions need to be updated. Fifth is the demographic experience study. This is presented every 5 or 6 years to the board, and this would look at updating mortality rates, retirement rates, termination rates, disability rates, and service-based salary increases, and if those assumptions need to be changed. Sixth is the annual LEF 2 actuarial evaluation, which the primary purpose is to determine the contribution requirements for the plan. Seventh is the administrative factor adoption, focusing on the administrative factor for annuities. And as Steve mentioned, eighth is the fiscal note audit on those 2 bills which had cost to the plan. And here is a look at the proposed actuarial topic calendar. As you'll see, it's pretty heavy. You're going to have 2 or 3 presentations from the actuaries or from staff on these topics each month, apart from the October offsite, which will be a much longer funding corridor discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All these things are integrated, obviously. and part of a decision-making process. Looking at the calendar here, where you have funding method in June and ASAP in July, almost seems just context over a period of years here. This month, we're in a 10-year economic run-up that's unprecedented in our country's history. Usually you see about a 2-year cycle, not a correction, but just a fluctuation, a cycle in the markets out there. Because of that, we run about a 7-year smoothing corridor on this. And so we're beyond our corridor, our model that we're using at this point. So the numbers we're seeing, I think, at this point are I don't know, an outlier, an anomaly, something that they can't be captured within our current model. I think that we should probably combine in the same meeting the funding method and the ASOP, do a comparison contrast, because they'll be talking about maybe some of the potential exposures, liabilities, threats out there. At the same time, we're talking about what an appropriate funding percentage is or corridor is for system funding. So we have at least some bumper to bump up against and actually understand maybe what's coming, maybe some of the threats or problems or things running in front of us here to play one off against the other. Everything's integrated in this calendar, and yet I think those two things have a substantial nexus to each other in our decision-making process. One man's opinion.
One thing to break the topic down a little bit further on the which may resolve your question. The funding method will actually end up being sort of two parts. Part one will be what I call the base rate. I don't want to use actuarial terms, but sort of what is the expected long-term cost of the plan. And that's the first piece that you'll tackle. Those presentations will be from the actuary's office. The second piece about what reserve is reasonable and how do you define that, that'll be the second piece. So that will actually come after the ASOP 51 discussion. At first, the first piece will be talking more about the actual actuarial cost method that the plan should use going forward. That all fair, Lisa? Okay.
Any other questions on the calendar? Fairly aggressive schedule.
And you'll see a lot of the presentations are from OSA.
Right.
So some of the things that have come up in the past where, for instance, pricing potential benefit improvement costs, there may not be any kind of capacity this interim to add on a lot of stuff to that, even though with respect to the benefit improvement account, there may be a lot of interest in doing some things along those lines. That'll be one of the issues that we'll have to balance. But that will kind of be the flow. You'll take a look at the supplemental rate early, look at the actuarial cost method early. You've got these regular reports that are scheduled every year, 2 years, 5 or 6 years, and you'll be presented with all of those. And leading up to hopefully having a final funding policy adopted before the start of session. But it will be aggressive both for you and for OSA. So I wanted to make sure that was out there.
Are we doing a strategic plan?
That's the plan right now for October.
Over? Okay.
So that will lead off the discussion on the options for the second piece of the funding policy, what kind of reserve is reasonable and how do you define it?
What we're looking at, Steve, is this is only a partial agenda items.
This
There's
is
a lot more on the
this is
agenda
just
per
the
month.
This is
actuarial
only the
topics.
actuarial. From the benefit piece, you know
Okay.
right off the bat, you've got two that you have to do, the interrupted military and the tribal participation. And you've got three others that, or three of those, interrupted military, survivor option, and month of death, that would require coordination with the select committee if you work on those. Those would all be above and beyond the actuarial.
And a benefit improvement account
Yeah.
every month.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. So that is it for the actuarial topics section. The next section is admin topics, and this is for Steve.
Okay. This is actually also an unusual interim for the board in terms of administrative topics. Last year, you voted to take over adopting the agency budget. And so you adopted a budget in December for the remainder of the biennium. Moving forward now, we've got two different options, and you don't need to decide on it this month. But one option would be that we bring you a draft budget or a budget preview in June, and then you would adopt a final budget in July. That gets you that has the budget in place right when the biennium starts, but the information that we're going to have on a lot of those issues is rough. So that means the likelihood of having to come back to you to recommend changes to the budget is higher. The other option would be to defer adoption of the budget until December, but then you'd have a lot more information, but the biennium's already 3, 4, 5 months gone, and what we would be doing for those months is sort of operating under what had been in place prior to that. We're okay going down either path. It's your call, but those would be sort of the two potential ways forward.
Why wouldn't we adopt it in October?
At the historically, you haven't taken action in October, but that would, I think, be a possibility as well.
Okay. Could we get some, the pros and cons on October?
Yeah, we'll have all of those for you in June.
Okay.
We're going to give you a budget preview in June, and then at that time you can decide whether you want to move forward with adoption in July or at some later point in the interim. And we'll
Okay.
go through all those pros and cons. So we'll have that for you at the next meeting. General, the next topic, for instance, is one of the questions that's going to come up as far as the budget. The board received our 12-month notice from the State Investment Board that we need to vacate the building. They were approved for some additional FTEs in the budget, and they need the space. So we are going to start looking for a new location for the board. We've been here for 15 years. It's been a great relationship with the SIB. They've allowed us to use the boardroom. They have supported us in terms of co-location in a number of ways, technical assistance, and so there's going to be a lot of potential impacts, not just the physical move, which will disrupt productivity or time loss or things like that, but we may lose some efficiencies that we've had from locating here. Still in discussions with the SIB about the possibility of continuing to use the boardroom even after we're no longer in the building. But the SIB made a decision a while back, nobody that's not a tenant gets to use the boardroom. So they would have to kind of revisit that decision when we are no longer a tenant, whether that works for them or not. So part of the move may also involve finding new location for board meetings. It's agency moves is a process that you go through DES and OFM, so there's a whole lot of regulation and process involved there, which we're beginning to go through, and we'll keep you updated on that, of course, throughout the interim. That'll be on my regular monthly admin update from here on as far as where we're at as regarding the move. One other impact before I move on that I need to mention is a staff change. Ryan Frost gave his final presentation to the board earlier this meeting, at least for this interim, I'm going to say. Ryan got offered a great promotion and raise to go to work for a pension think tank. And so he's going to be helping out a number of different states that are evaluating pension questions, legislative questions moving forward. He'll still be located when he's not traveling here in Olympia, so the plan is that I'm going to stay in touch, and down the road, my long-term plan is to potentially bring him back if I can interest him in that at some point in time in the future where it makes sense. But for this interim, short term, Jacob is extremely high capacity. He's going to be picking up a lot of the topics that Ryan has been working on. And both Tim and I have backgrounds as policy analysts as well. So the team will handle things until we can get a replacement in. But I'll begin working on that, finding a replacement as well, and let you know how that goes. I personally want to thank Ryan. He's been an extraordinary person to work with for the last 5 years. And when I was at DRS, 6 years, yeah.
No, 6 was good. Yeah. You might have been here 7, but only 6 was good. First year was a little tough.
Yeah, he will be missed, and so hopefully that I plan on staying in touch. There are a couple of other then items, just so that you guys know. Elections. So this is the year that you guys do elections. They're done in September. Once new appointments have been made, and the appointments are kind of in flux right now. We have not heard anything from the Association of Counties or the Governor's Office about any proposed replacements for the vacant lawyer representative position that's historically been filled by a county representative. Similarly, there is one position for police and one position for fire that are up for appointment. And the 2 legislative positions, Representative Berquist has been reappointed. We haven't heard formally yet from the Senate about an appointment. However, under the board's operating procedures, anybody who's in that position can remain and vote until they're replaced. So Senator Warnick can continue to serve on the board as long as she is willing. Senator, I particularly appreciate you being here today so that we have a quorum, and then we'll work with the Senate on getting that appointment filled.
No problem.
Thank you.
Whatever needs to be done.
2 other decisions that the board made last year that you wanted to put on the agenda for this interim has to do with a trustee education policy and a trustee attendance policy. So those are topics that we will be bringing to you this interim, and we'll treat them just like the regular 3-step benefit topics with initial and follow-up reports before you're asked to adopt them. One of the discussion topics that came up last year was meeting delivery alternatives. We probably won't do too much on that one this interim now because of the move. So with your permission on that, what we'll wait to see is where we're at before we can evaluate what's even possible there. We'll be coordinating with DRS on rulemaking throughout the interim, and the relationship with the department has been good. The coordination with the department's been good. I also want to make a special mention at this time as well that the Office of the State Actuary, the team that supports the Select Committee on Pension Policy, we had a number of great meetings during session about how do we coordinate policy topics between the Left 2 board and the Select Committee, and what can we do as staff for the board or as staff for the committee to make that coordination smoother for our decision-making bodies. Those meetings were very productive, and so we've got some new procedures that we'll implement moving forward this year, and it looks like we'll need them because we've got a couple of topics at least that we'll probably be coordinating on. There's a financial audit every year, so you'll be getting that as well. The plan is to use the State Auditor's Office again. They did it last year. You'll have the regular presentations from the Department of Retirement Systems and the State Investment Board on administering benefits and investing your trust fund. We're planning on the strategic meeting in October. Again, that'll be right now all the meetings might be off-site, but that one for sure will be. And then we'll conduct some annual AG training as well once we get all the appointments squared out. That, in a very high level, is the issues on the agenda that are administrative related. As you can see, between the move and the staff change, those are the kind of issues that can impact our service delivery to you. I think we can cover all of the policy presentations okay. Depending on when the move happens, there may be some minor interruptions about availability and stuff, but you all know, in particular, all of you have my cell phone. I am always available, and so that we're moving forward trying to minimize any service delivery impacts, but there's bound to be some. Keep you posted as far as the move. I don't think it impacts our capacity to take on issues. We'll be asking you next month to make some decisions about which of these issues you do or do not. You know, for instance, do you want an initial presentation on standby pay? And then we can schedule those. Some of the other issues that have been deferred from past interims, are they a priority? You know, has something changed to where they're a priority to resolve this interim, or are they something that could be put off for another year, or definitely? Those decisions, there'll be a lot of decisions to make in June. And then you'll be into formal adoption, potentially beginning on some items like a supplemental rate as soon as July. There was an unanticipated conflict on both, with WACOPS having their annual conference right now and firefighters having their new member conference right now, which impacted availability of some board members. But I'd like to make a plea is probably not too strong a word, to be available for those June and July meetings. Plan is on the interim. The plan, we did not schedule anything for October, or for August, which historically you've taken off. That'll be up to you. If you can take care of everything that you need to take care of in June and July, then I think you can make the interim work even by continuing to take August off. If we don't have a quorum at June or July, that will booger up the entire interim. So,
Steve, just
yeah,
maybe it's a question and a comment. We have, I guess, set aside October as kind of a strategic plan.
yes, historically.
Yeah, and I'm looking at what we've laid out in front of us on the calendar and the work that needs to be done. I mean, would it be maybe at least something to consider about having that a regular meeting
Or if,
or half a day?
or what we may do, for instance, some of these topics that will take board action,
Yeah,
like, for instance, the trustee education or the trustee attendance
Policies,
policies,
yeah.
maybe those are topics that could be done at October with the idea that you could adopt them. Maybe there'd be some. So that's a fair point. Given what's on the agenda, the fact that you don't take action in October, that may have to change this year. It's worked well to have that be a strategically focused meeting, but some of these topics are also fairly strategic. So I think it could.
questions for Steve?
We've covered a lot of different topics. We wanted to just give you a preview of the upcoming interim, answer any specific questions that you might have. But are there any general questions that you have about either any of this stuff or something else that we did not cover? Okay.
Yeah,
Oh, Ade.
I think just, to have it on the record, I know we've talked about these a great deal regarding I'm hoping that with the schedule that you've outlined with the moving, how we're going to get through most of these items. And based on our conversation earlier regarding the benefit enhancement, that I think it needs to be. There's so many things that the staff needs to do and bring back to the board. How is all of this going to work?
For the benefit improvement account, when yesterday I spoke at WACOP's conference, and there was a lot of questions about that, including what is the board going to do. And I told them I see it from the perspective of staff as sort of a three-step process. And the first step is just assessment. The governor just signed the bill yesterday, so part of it'll be, where are we? What has happened? When is the money going to go in? Are there going to be lawsuits associated with it? If so, what is that going to mean? So there'll be this assessment phase, which will probably go on for, at the very least, a couple of months. And it could go on much longer. The second phase then is, once you know where you're at, there'll be the start of discussions about what to do with the money. And that kind of, I'm calling the agreement phase. Our role will be helping you with those discussions, coming up with alternatives, potentially pricing alternatives, walking through all the different policy questions that are likely to come up. And again, that agreement phase could go on for years, potentially. But once there is then agreement about what to do with the benefit improvement account, then you'd enter into the third phase, which would be a legislative phase. And we'd work with you to come up with a legislative recommendation and a bill to present to the board or to the legislature about what the board recommends doing with the benefit improvement account. very high level, very rough, because that's subject to change. But that is what we see with the process. We're going to, the assessment phase will have a minimal impact on our work. It's stuff that we're doing already. And there may be some things like we may have to reach out to Ice Miller, or we may have to, for legal advice on some points. But the impact on us will be somewhat minimal. Once you get into the agreement phase, that's where it could, there'll be staff presentations potentially from us, and there may be impacts on the actuary as well in terms of pricing things. I use the analogy to the stakeholders of saying it's a bit like taking the law enforcement officers and the firefighters and the employers all out to dinner and saying you all have to agree on one entree, and here's the menu at the Cheesecake Factory to choose from. And if you haven't eaten there, they've got about a 60-page menu. So that's part of it. It could be overwhelming to start with. We'll be able to help look at things like, well, don't bother looking at entrees that cost more than $30 because that's all you have, or those, will be able to help to some extent put some parameters around those considerations. But that piece will have an impact on staff and on the actuary's office. And
Based on that, sounds like we may actually have two issues then. I think listening to you, that is how to spend the money. I guess another concern is 2 years from now, 3 years from now, the state is looking for a way to enhance the benefit, which I think is a great thing. I think it is a great thing. But they are taking the fund out of the employee's pension account. So what happens 2 years from now, 3 years from now? Again, I guess that's where I'm going. How do we deal with, what the state did with the budget by using the pension fund to do the benefit enhancement, and which is intended to be, that is, I think, LEF 2, as we've discussed, LEF 2 is one of the best run, pension plan in the country, not in the state, and I think it is that way for a reason. And I think, protecting that fund, I think is crucial. So if we now and then, we're able to rake it to do some other things, we really protecting that fund. We really, I think, based on Ryan, we have 109, rate, and it is going down to probably 106, which is still really good. But I think if there's a saying, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. If we don't know the benchmark that we need to be, how do we know when the state is taking too much?
see, that question came up legislatively during the discussions about the benefit improvement account bill. And I think the funding policy piece that the board will be working on this interim, that puts increased importance on that. That, one of the goals of that policy will be what kind of reserve is reasonable. You've got legislators who have a wide variety of opinions on what level of reserve is reasonable, from negative 20%. If you're at 80% funded, you should be happy with that, to, something else. And so we'll be working with the actuary's office this interim to come up with some math. That was your request at last December, is if we're going to come up with a corridor, have those numbers make some actuarial sense. And I think the benefit improvement account bill put renewed interest and perhaps made it a higher priority that gets resolved this interim, because then you at least have a framework to discuss how much reserve is reasonable, and do we have more or less than that now? So that question, Ade, is going to come up multiple times, I think, this interim, with the hope that the board can answer that and provide that kind of answer to the legislature before next session. I don't think we'll have any proposals next session. It's not an operating budget year, but to the extent that the state, you mentioned, they relieved their obligation under the old benefit improvement account funding mechanism. There were legislative discussions or proposals about relieving all kinds of other state obligations to Left 2, such as their ongoing monthly contributions to the plan. And so theoretically, things could come up in the future, you're right, and having some statement from the board about what your policy is will be helpful in those future discussions.
It's interesting to see how cycles run. I remember back in the late 80s, early 90s, when this discussion was taking place back then, when we did not have a board, which makes this board very important now. I remember legislators, and there was at least one in the House that was very strong, and she showed her strength a lot of times on what the contribution rate should be, because if you fund it at this rate, you can pay the benefits, but if we get any higher than that, then the beneficiaries are going to ask for more. So they always continue to artificially keep the contribution rate down low, but then talked about the idea that they didn't have the money to fund it, and that we were being held up through other states, not as bad as Illinois or some other states on our lowered contribution rates and over our whole plans, PERS, TERS, and the other ones. And so since we've adopted this board, the pension has been well funded, and we have actually been held up as a model to most states on what they should be doing. And I think that's why it's good to have this board, because this is a discussion we need to have as we move forward to keep the legislature understanding that there's a reason why we have a contribution rate and a fallback on the benefits. So it's going to be interesting to see how we work down the line. But I remember this discussion only was with just legislatures back in the early 90s. And it's nice to have this board that has the ability to set our rates through the legislature. So it's funny to hear after all these years that we're right back to where we were again. It's like, how much is too much and what's too little? So thank you.
Other questions? All right, Steve?
All right.
Just looking at, can I ask a question? Just
Yeah.
make sure we're on the same page. So we did have a kind of action status. We talked about board action required for our plan. Is that something we need to do, or is that something, I mean, if we've laid out the plan in front of us, all this is on the table, so to speak.
If there were, just for planning purposes,
Right.
if there were some items that you could say today that you feel comfortable saying, we're not interested in this interim, then we could move those off the agenda. And we wouldn't even bring those back to you in June for your consideration for the upcoming interim. If you're not at a place yet, which would be totally reasonable, this is just the introduction.
Right.
To make that kind of decision on any of those topics, then the plan would be to make those decisions in June. But that was the thinking there. And if there was, we're not asking you to adopt this tentative schedule. We'll
Right.
we'll have the full interim, as best we know it, plan for you in June?
I think for the board, I'll reach out to those who aren't able to, either listen in or be here in attendance today, is that probably some homework. I think we need to come back in June and be prepared to have a tough conversation what we want to move forward on. I think Steve's outlined with his team. We've got a very aggressive agenda. We have lots of work to do. And for us to, merely just kind of kick it down the road a little further when in fact we're probably not real fond of the idea or very warm to it, let's pull it off the schedule. Let's give our group, our team, maybe the direction to free up some space where they can put it in some much needed areas where we'll see more value and we'll probably end up supporting some of the things that move forward. So that'll be the homework, I think, for all of us, just to look at that schedule. Yep. Go ahead, Pat. Oh, you're patting? Right, yep. Yeah, we have the benefit, the actuarial topics, of course, I think all are going to be something that has to, and that comes forward. That's a given. And your administrative topics are kind of an overview, so.
Yeah, we'll hit you on all of where the decision points are
Yep.
in June.
Yep. Okay. Fair enough. All right, so then we do have an administrative update, item number 4.
Yeah. Now, let's see. Okay. I've talked a little bit about the agency move already, so I won't go into that. I've also talked with you a little bit about where we're at on the budget. We haven't got final word yet on what OFM's decision about our spending authority is yet, but we'll have that before June. The idea is that we will move forward with a budget that stays within that spending authority for June and July. That's for your adoption. I don't think that there's anything right now that's pressing from a trustee sense that would require us to go beyond that. But the next step, we'll bring you a budget preview in June, and that'll be Tim doing that. The other one item I wanted to mention, there was a public records request from Phil Talmadge, former state legislator, former Supreme Court justice. He's doing some legal work for the retired firefighters of Washington, and he wanted access to any correspondence that we'd had from a number of different attorneys. Most of the time that stuff historically has been privileged, but there's been some changes in how privilege is applied even to legal advice. And so we're working to satisfy that request. Jessica and Jacob are working on it, and I think they've sent emails to all of the board members. If you haven't responded to them yet, please do so. And if you're not familiar, if this is not ringing any bells for you at all, they can let you know what to look for. A number of different outreach activities since the last board meeting. Tim was at a benefits fair for Snohomish and another one in Seattle. WACOPS is having their spring meeting right now. I was there yesterday. And then the sheriffs and police chiefs will be having their meeting later this month, and Tammy will be at that one. For you, the next meeting is June 26th. And again, having a quorum is going to be critical. So please let the team know well ahead of time if there is going to be a conflict with your attendance at the June meeting, and to the extent that you can teleconference, that would be very helpful if you can't be here in person, just to make sure that we've got a quorum and that all of the stakeholders have an opportunity to be heard about all the different issues that the board's going to be working on this interim. We'll have a draft agenda for you at the June meeting for the interim. The agenda items for future meetings, which would be the next topic. Right now, I haven't heard anything today about anything new being added. So we'll plan on bringing you sort of the interim, a draft interim work plan for your potential adoption in June. It'll be draftier than normal because of the potential impacts with the move, but we'll do the best that we can to put that together. Lunch is ready. So if there are any questions, we could talk about those. Otherwise, that concludes my administrative update to the board.
Any other questions or comments? I'll work just so everybody's aware that we do have start the process for the director's evaluation, which we do. I'll work with the administrative team, make sure we're ready to move forward with that, which we've done. So I'll talk, Ade and I will have a conversation after that and bring Jason in when we can here shortly. But we'll move forward with that. But I don't have anything else. Anybody else have anything for the future agendas? Okay. Guess, we've lost our quorum. Pat snuck out. I saw him leave the parking lot. So, I guess we need, I can't even make an motion to adjourn. Like, yeah. It's self-adjourned now. Yeah, I was like, wow, what happened? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think that technically the language is there no longer being a quorum present.
Yeah.
The meeting or the business of the board is considered finished.
Terminated
Yes.
is a good word, yeah. So, all right, so we'll see everybody in June. All right, hey, thank you. Thank you, Senator. Before we leave, hey, Ryan, on behalf of our group, thank you. Wish you nothing but the best. Hope to see you down the road here shortly. Go out and get some great experience you can bring back maybe, huh? I don't know, but we really appreciated working with you. Done a great job, so thank you. All right, everybody.
Thank you all. We'll see you next month.
All right, thank you, Senator.